At 11 o'clock on the morning of the 11th of November, 1918, I was standing in a trench near Lewes Forest. Word had passed down the line that the Armistice was to come into effect that morning. But after 4 years of false hopes, none of us dared to believe it. Then, all of a sudden, the shelling stopped. There had been a steady barrage for hours, then silence. It was as though the very earth had ceased to breathe. We looked at each other, dumbfounded. I remember one fellow saying, "Well, that's it, lads," and lighting a cigarette with a hand that shook as if it belonged to an old man. Slowly, men began to stand up along the parapet. No officers shouted us down. No bullets came. The birds, which had long abandoned this blasted place, began to sing again in the trees along the ridge. The sound was almost unbearable in its beauty. A few of the men laughed, others cried. I saw one sergeant take off his steel helmet, look up to the sky, and just whisper, "Thank God." Later that day, we moved forward through the wire, past the dead that still lay where they had fallen, and into ground that had been fought over for months. There were Germans doing the same on the other side. Some waved to us, others simply stared, hollow-eyed and silent. None of us felt like cheering. We were just tired. For the first time in years, the guns were still. But the silence was not peace. It was too full of ghosts for that.
The morning of the 11th came, cold, grey and misty. Rumours had reached us that an armistice was to be signed, but after so many wild tales we gave it little heed. At about 10 minutes to 11 I was standing in a muddy trench, watching the shells still bursting on the ridge ahead. The guns were firing as they had fired every day for months, methodically, tirelessly, senselessly. Then, almost imperceptibly, it happened. The firing slackened, stumbled, and stopped. The silence that followed seemed to fall like a curtain. It was not peace, it was simply the absence of sound, and it struck us dumb. A thin mist drifted over the shell holes, and from somewhere far away came the note of a bugle, hesitant, uncertain. One of my men said, "So that's it, sir?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. We stood there, filthy and unshaven, listening to the sheer emptiness of the air. For the first time in years there was no shell screaming, no rattle of machine guns, no crash of mortars. I saw a private, a big fellow from Yorkshire, begin to sob quietly. No one mocked him. We all felt the same, though none of us could have said why. There was no triumph in us, only relief and exhaustion. Later I walked along the trench and saw men staring dumbly into space, as if waiting for something to begin. But nothing began. The war had stopped, and we did not yet know how to live without it.
I was at the dressing station that morning, tending to a batch of wounded who had come down from the line during the night. The shelling had not yet stopped, and the thunder of the guns was still rolling overhead. Around 11 o'clock, a runner burst into the clearing station, breathless and mud-smeared, shouting that the armistice had been signed, that the guns were to cease fire that minute. We looked at him as if he'd gone mad. But then, as we listened, we realized the thunder was fading. One by one, the great guns fell silent, until only the wind and the faint cries of the injured could be heard. A strange quiet came over the room. The wounded men stopped talking, even those in pain. For a few seconds we all just listened to the silence. One lad, his leg newly bandaged, said softly, "So it's over then?" Nobody answered. The words hung in the air like smoke. Then someone began to laugh, a wild, broken laugh that turned into a sob. Another man took his hand, and soon half a dozen were weeping, others cheering weakly. A nurse dropped to her knees and said a prayer. I went outside and looked over the fields. The horizon was hazy, the sky a dull November grey. In the distance, I could see figures, our men and theirs, standing on the parapets, waving helmets, calling across the wire. For the first time in 4 years, no one was trying to kill the other. I felt no joy, only an emptiness so deep it hurt. The war was over, yes, but for many, the ending had come too late.
I was in London when the armistice was declared. It was late morning when the news reached us. The church bells, long silent throughout the years of war, began to ring again, uncertainly at first, as though even they had forgotten how to sound for joy. The city seemed to come alive all at once. People poured into the streets, cheering, waving flags, embracing strangers. I saw clerks dancing with typists, old men crying in the gutters, and soldiers home on leave lifted onto shoulders like heroes from some ancient myth. The sound of the cheering rolled through the streets like the tide. Yet amid all the jubilation, there was something uneasy, a shadow that no one spoke of. Every person there had lost someone. I remember a woman beside me, holding a photograph in her hand, smiling through tears. She kept saying, "If only he could see this day." As the bells pealed and the crowds sang, I felt strangely apart from it all. The joy was real, but so was the grief. The war had ended, yes, but the dead would not return, and the world we had known before 1914 was gone forever.
On the morning of the 11th of November, 1918, we were told the armistice had been signed and that all firing would stop at 11 o'clock. But the shelling still went on up to the last minute. I don't think any of us quite believed it was really coming to an end. At 11:15, the Germans sent over a few more shells and our artillery replied in kind. Then suddenly, at 11 sharp, it was as if a switch had been turned off. The guns went quiet, just like that. We all looked at one another, waiting for something to happen. A few of the lads laughed, but most just stood silent. We'd been living with noise, danger, and death for so long that the quiet felt unnatural, almost frightening. A couple of fellows fired their rifles into the air, and one bloke started to play a mouth organ. Others climbed up onto the parapet and stared across no man's land. There were Germans doing the same. Some waved, some shouted greetings, and before long a few actually came over. We met them halfway, no officers stopped us, and swapped cigarettes and souvenirs. Nobody talked about victory or glory. We were simply glad to be alive. But we also felt strange, as though the world had ended, and we were the last men left. The silence after 4 years of hell was the queerest sound I've ever heard.